Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation this morning. I speak today on behalf of the chief executives of the 20 agencies, including the World Bank, that are active members of UN Energy, and also on behalf of the Secretary General's Advisory Group on Energy and Climate Change. UN Energy was established as a decision from the World Summit on Sustainable Development. At that time, almost 10 years ago, the environmental groups, NGOs, ministers, and others recognized that we needed to pay closer attention to energy issues. The Energy and Climate Change Advisory Group was formed by His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon just last year, based on his own observations around the world, recognizing that as he was putting all political capital of the United Nations behind climate change solutions, he recognized that to fix climate change, we must also tackle energy issues. This is a group, it's a multi-stakeholder group made up of UN members, but more importantly dominated, we put deliberately in structuring it, large numbers of private sector CEOs from major energy companies like Vattenfall, Statoil, Suntech, the largest solar PV producer in the world, some of the experts who will be here today, NACI, and so on, with geographic balance. And we've been working together since last year, looking at energy issues. And we launched this report just in April. The Secretary General launched this report, Energy for a Sustainable Future, April this year. So it's my second time to be in this hallowed hall and seeing that it is full. We did this in April, it was full. Now you do it again, no seating space left. Because suddenly it is true that in New York, in the political establishment of New York, we recognize that it is time to begin to dialogue on energy. And for me, this is really welcome. I've spent 15 years in the UN. I know each time energy issues come, there's a deadlock or we shift it to another committee somewhere. Nobody wants to talk about it. But I think the time has gone. Now is a new era. Today, I'll talk more about energy, the missing Millennium Development Goal. When we adopted the Millennium Development Goals in 2000, there was no mention of energy. Fortunately now, as I look at the outcome document, based on a lot of work we've done now in 5 months here, actively in New York, it is sprinkled in various places. It's a good beginning. The door has been opened. We recognize that if communities and nations do not have access to energy, most of them cannot achieve the Millennium Development Goals. The recognition is coming in. I suppose part of this awakening is what happened in 2008. When the price of oil hit $150 a barrel, you didn't have to convince anybody anymore that energy pricing, or energy for that matter, was linked to food security, because suddenly there were riots around the world. And I was with the Secretary General and my colleagues trying to see how we tackle that immediately. The political fallout, but also to make sure people are not hungry. But immediately in all the analysis, we saw the connection between energy and the price of fertilizer, the price of various food commodities around the world. So that solved one problem, the link between energy and the hunger dimension of the MDGs. But at the same time as we were discussing that, the financial crisis hit. And we were having other emergency discussions. And you can imagine the debate among economists. What triggered the financial crisis? If you talk to some, they'll tell you there were a lot of problems structurally, but you know something? Maybe one of the triggers was that energy price. Suddenly, again, people said, there's some link here with economic development and all of that. Energy is the missing Millennium Development Goal. Dr. Pachauri, the Nobel laureate and chair of IPCC, mentioned that 2 years ago for the first time in one of his speeches. He said, in fact, he believes energy was the missing Millennium Development Goals. I'm told a lot of you are energy experts, so forgive me if I repeat the obvious. But as a former professor, I know that when you repeat, maybe the message stays home. What are some of the facts? According to the IEA 2008-2009 forecasts for the next several decades, energy demand will increase by 45% between 2008 to 2030. Energy-related emissions are the dominant contributor to climate change. The energy sector accounts for 84% of global CO2 emissions and 64% of world's greenhouse gas emissions. You can't fix climate change if you don't have an energy revolution. The emissions are projected to increase by 57% by 2030 if we continue business as usual. It is also a fact that about 2.5 to 3 billion people in the world today lack access to modern energy services, amongst whom another 1.6 billion have no access to electricity. I know this. When I go to Sierra Leone, I have to go to my village, and so from enjoying the first world, I go back to the real reality. No running water, no electricity in my village. But I can afford to bring a generator to the village. But it is an embarrassment when you have your generator on and everybody else is in darkness, including your uncles, your aunts, and the rest of your relatives. But energy is also about gender empowerment, because I hear that a lot of the focus in this MDG review will be on these social sector MDGs, particularly the gender dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, for many of you and myself, our mothers and our sisters have to fetch the firewood to cook. Our sisters, our mothers, and our aunties, also, if they forget to bring the water in the morning, they have to go back and fetch the water to make sure they can cook. Worst of all, when they cook and burn biomass, they inhale cancerous smoke. WHO and others have estimated that about 1.6 million people die every year because of indoor air pollution. As a result of that indoor air pollution, they develop pulmonary diseases. Most of them are women and children. For those of us from Africa or some parts of Asia, we know that when our mothers cook in the smoke-filled kitchen, we play on the side. When they cook, if we're crying too much, they put us on their back and they continue to cook. Access to energy is about gender economic empowerment. The time they spent, we have studies. If you want all of that, we can give them to you. Our colleagues in DESA, UNDP, WHO, UNIFEM, they have this already quantified. How much time women spend to collect the fuel wood and come back. How much time they spend to go back and fetch the water. And I know for WFP, they're analyzing also the dangers they face. And so I just want to leave one message here. If this MDG is going to discuss women empowerment, women's health, children's health, we better look at the issue of energy access very, very closely. But more importantly, for the rest of the world, the dream of every nation in fighting poverty is that the economies will become modern economies. Meaning what? That there must be structural change. No country in this world wants to be a poor agrarian country. No country in this world wants 75% of its population living in rural areas as peasant farmers. None. Show me one. Show me one. To achieve that structural change, they need energy to power their economies. You might say that's cliche, that is obvious, but I tell you, when you look at financing for development for some time, that was not recognized. So as much as we know, it was not recognized. That's why we want to mobilize. We want to mobilize to make sure that the energy issues become central. Because all the major challenges we face, climate change, food security, poverty, gender empowerment, all of them central to that is energy. Energy access, but also energy efficiency. This is why the Secretary General's Advisory Group has proposed 2 key political goals. The first goal We're calling for universal access to modern energy services by 2030. Universal access to modern energy services by 2030. We launched it here in April. The second one, reduce global energy intensity, the quantity of energy per unit of economic output, by 40% by 2030. We are combining a call for energy access and at the same time with a call for massive improvement in energy efficiency. It's important to even poor countries. Some people tell me, oh, but for poor countries, the issue is access first. But in those poor countries, the generation, transmission of energy is also wasteful. So you need both. And if you are efficient and you don't waste energy, perhaps you save money because you don't have to generate so much. So in fact, we argue that your first access is the energy you save and you don't waste. We're calling for both. We're mobilizing, really mobilizing heavily. The first mobilization was the past several months since we launched the report here, to make sure that this MDG review does not leave out energy again. And we are very grateful to the diplomats here in New York for listening to that call, and I see it sprinkled, a little phrase here, a little sentence here and there in the outcome document. I hope it survives next week, because in the political negotiation sometimes some things lose out. I say to those NGOs who are pushing for the social sectors, that this is not about either or, it is both. For a good health clinic to run, you need a power source. I know, I'm from Africa. My country, many years ago, there were times surgery was done and then the power goes out. There are times people have died because the electricity went out and the oxygen was not supplied to the theater. It's not either or. I know that with refrigeration in communities, you can store vaccines. In fact, some of the strongest supporters of our call within the UN for energy access are UNICEF and WHO. They know what it means in rural communities to have a power source.